Council membership and was an ambassador to the UN in Geneva, where he was elected Vice President of the UN Human Rights Council and Vice Chairman of the South Center. This evening, we are also honored to have a distinguished panel discuss the book. Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, former Foreign Secretary of India, National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, will chair the discussion today. He's the author of several insightful books, including Choices Inside the Making of Indian Foreign Policy, and most recently, India and Asian Geopolitics. We're also joined by Claude Arpi, a renowned Tibetologist who has dedicated much of his career to studying the history and culture of Tibet, China, and the Indian subcontinent. He's the author of several notable books, including Tibet, The Lost Frontier, and Dharamshala and Beijing, and writes regularly on China, India, and Europe. Our moderator for the evening is Smita Sharma, an award-winning independent journalist, columnist, and TV commentator, reporting in both Hindi and English on foreign policy and security issues. She has hosted a daily show focusing on topics affecting ordinary citizens, policy matters, legislation, and more. With this, I hand over the discussion to all of you.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, namaste, Ashidale. And I think we were told that we are going to launch the book first. So may I request the dignitaries on the dais to please come in for the book launch. It is launched. Congratulations. I've been, of course, I've known Ambassador Dilip Sinha, also Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, and a whole lot of the who's who of the diplomatic corps who've turned up here in large numbers. Since 2003-04, as a rookie reporter, I would chase each of you with my mic, asking you questions and pester you constantly. But it's an honor to be here on the stage. Thank you for inviting me, Dilip. And I may have spammed a couple of inboxes on your behalf, so I'm sorry about that, but I think the turnout looks good. I think this is a very, very important and a timely book that's been written when we talk about Tibet, with almost around 25% of the PRC landmass. And you look at the great games, the cat and mouse games that have been on for centuries now, be it, of course, the Russian and the British empires, be it the Cold War or the US-China bipolarity that is dominating every single conversation today. And of course, the uncertainties, as you see, of President Trump all set to perhaps return in power in White House. So when you look at this book, which analyzes how the imperial powers, Russia, Britain, China, have played these games and the cost that Tibet and Tibetans have had to pay for it over centuries, the landlocked nation, the fate being sealed by the geopolitical games that have been placed. And so the book really looks at a lot of complex history. It does a lot of digging through archives and research material. There's some very interesting chapters. I'm not giving away. The one that I really liked was also, in particular, when Britain and Russia had to define the eastern limit of Afghanistan in Pamir and the exchanges that take place. Importantly, I think this discussion couldn't have happened at a more apt time, given you've had just weeks before we saw the congressional delegation visit to Dharamshala. You've also had the Resolve Tibet Act, which has been signed into law. Did you know of it, Dilip? I mean, how did you time it so well? You had the secret notes.
Thank you, Smita. I started this long time before this delegation, I think, was conceived. So this has become a bit of a coincidence, a happy coincidence in a certain extent in terms of the book's topicality, but it remains a coincidence.
Well, there are too many luminaries here on the room, and I'm sure all of you will have questions. We will keep our moderated conversation a little short, and I'll try and take in as many questions as we can from the audience. And, I'm so glad to be joined by Ambassador Menon here, also Professor Arpi, who is actually an Indian citizen and an honorary French, who's been living in Pondicherry just for around 49 years. But, you clearly, of course, are one of us and one of the most authoritative voices when it comes to writings on Tibet. We all turn to him for the learnings. Ambassador Menon, you spent, your early childhood years in Lhasa. Your father, of course, was posted there. Would you like to start by maybe recalling some of the early memories that you have? Something that you also thought was completely wiped out in the recent time, with whatever has been happening now.
Well, for me, I have a child's memories of Lhasa. For me, it was the place I learned to swim, I learned to ride a bicycle, played games. But the best part was there was no school. It was wonderful. So my mother taught me at home, but you know how that works. It doesn't. So therefore, I have purely happy memories of Tibet. And literally, it's a child's memories. I remember being taken at the age of 5 to see His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And my mother swears that I was a much better behaved child thereafter. But these are hardly. But my father was actually much more associated. He'd asked for Lhasa. He was Consul General in Lhasa during the early 50s. And then he was with the Dalai Lama and Panchalama in 56 when they came for Buddha Jayanti for the 2500th anniversary. Spent 7 months in India. And at the end, His Holiness had said he didn't want to go back. And because of what was happening in Tibet. And it was quite... and Joanna came thrice in a month and a half. His return. And it's quite involved in bringing him here. In fact, the family legend has it, I've never managed to track it down, that the first Xinhua headline which admitted that the Dalai Lama had left Tibet.
But, and before I go to Professor Orpi, Dilip, I would like to ask you, because when it comes to wading through research material in a particular archive, I've heard horror stories from research scholars, particularly the authors who have delved into research scholarly works. How easy, complex was it for you?
Well, it's very fascinating. It's a very slow, very tiring job going through old files. It's quite fascinating looking at writings, notings of people who lived 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And the records, especially in London, are outstanding. Some of them they've been digitized and are available on the net. But some of the better ones, the maps in particular, and there's handwritten notes of people going back to 1850s, 1860s. It's quite fascinating. But then you could read the handwriting also. So it's a very, one can say, thankless job when you're doing it, but when you come to see it in print and you have a crowd like this, then you really feel...
It was exhausting too.
It's very exhausting. It's a very, 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 very dull job writing any kind of writing. So you're locked up in a room and you write, but it's when you see it in print that it's very satisfying to feel that you've written this down.
Thank you to you and all the previous scholars who have made jobs of people like us easier over the years by going through that exhausting process. Professor Orpi, if you could start with some thoughts on the book, and also, there's a lot of younger people here in the room. I'm sure they would be curious to know that this, how does a Frenchman really get involved with so much of Tibetan history? What really drove you into doing so much of research and writing on Tibet in particular?
Thank you. I think I have not yet understood fully, but I was really fascinated. I saw a movie in the 60s. It's called The Message of the Tibetan. One French journalist, he went 6 months he met all the high lamas, including His Holiness, and I saw this movie. I was fascinated, so I decided I was doing a dental surgery, I was studying, I was third year, 72. I decided to just go in Himalaya. But as you know, the French people, they don't speak English. At that time, zero English. So I managed to find my way up to Shimla and from Shimla to Manali. And I started meeting Tibetans. I went to all the settlements, Darjeeling, Dalhousie, Mussoorie, Dharamsala. And I met His Holiness. And I think it changed my life because these people, this guy, I'm saying in front of the representative of His Holiness, but they were just smiling and they had lost everything. And at that time, the most successful refugees in the world, they were very poor people. It was a hard work. They had to make the road. The job that the BRO is doing today, they were done by Tibetans, and it was really, really a hard job. And this guy was smiling. I said, what is wrong with these people? So I tried to know more, and I started immediately, went in history, and since that 72, 73 again, I came after my 4th year, and 74, when I graduated as a dentist, I decided to come. But in the meantime, I ended up in Auroville, but I always kept my contact with the Tibetan people and the Tibetan history, and so that's a small story.
What a fascinating journey, of course. But if I could now bring our thoughts as far as the book is concerned. Recently, I was just watching an interview with the Dr. Tenzin Dorji or Tendor, was a leading voice in the US, and he said that we are not pawns in a great game, we are actors on the global stage. Is that something that you really see happening right now, before I go back to the history that's mentioned in the book?
I think something is happening is the book of Ambassador Sinha and also the visit of Mrs. Pelosi has triggered something, some interest. I get so many people asking for interviews and never like that, because I've been on it since 50 years, but I must say that people have not shown too much interest for what is happening. And for some reason, it is changing. So I think it's very good, and I'm so happy that this book is out, because I spent 4 years working with USI, the United Service Institution, to collect all together all the documents and to publish 4 books between the relation between Tibet and India between 47 and 62. Because I always thought this should not be lost. We should remember. And I think what Ambassador Sinha has done is very good to remember and to propagate and to that this relation, all relation. I was recently in Lucknow Central Command. I visited all the forward area, and all this area, they live with Tibet, the trade with Tibet. I mean, less the religion in Uttarakhand, but in Kinnaur, Spiti, the monks were going. So the Himalaya is intimately linked with Tibet, and unfortunately today, since 2019, we can't even go to Kailash Mansarovar. Everything is the business in the street trade, Lipuk Lake, Natula, and Chipkila are closed, and that's a great tragedy. And of course, the Tibetans are here since 70 years with no progress. So I think this book will hopefully trigger something, some interest, and we should also maybe make the government think of small things, small steps to make it easier for the Tibetan and to take some step forward toward having a Indo-Tibet border, not a Sino-Indian border.
Yeah, very important, of course, reminder there. Ambassador Menon, what went wrong as far as India and the global community was concerned, their stance was concerned on Tibet, is something that has been debated again and again. And in this book also, if you look at some of the key premise where Ambassador Sinha focuses a lot on the fall of the Manchu dynasty in 1912, and essentially the argument that a lack of the international support is what left Tibet rudderless, unable to accomplish its mission. It may have actually been an opportunity for it to reassert its independence. So, would you say that it was essentially the refusal of the big powers to condemn China's invasion in 1950 that was a serious setback for Tibet? Was the international position a historical global blunder?
I think the strength of the book is that it's an honest account of what happened, of great power rivalry, how it affected Tibet, how it affected us, it affected each of us. And it also, I think, it also describes, because it's not only the great powers, after all, the Tibetans also had a say, they had agency in their own future. And they made choices. Some of them were worked out, some didn't. Government of India also made choices, some of them right, some wrong maybe. But it's, so it's a combination of things that, and the nice thing in the book is that this is not partisan historiography. It's a straightforward account based on the archives of what actually happened. And for me, the value is, if great power rivalry treated Tibet as a victim, and that Tibet was a victim, the Tibetan people especially, or a victim of great power rivalry. Today, you're back in a time of great power rivalry. This is not a time where the world order is settled or it's bipolar and so on. And frankly, maybe that opens up opportunities for Tibet. You don't know. I mean, and what the book does is it opens your mind to those possibilities. The book doesn't actually spell all this out, but it shows you how these things work, how they worked in the past, and therefore fresh thinking about how you approach the question. For me, that's the value of the book right now. Not that, oh yes, suddenly now everything has changed and things are going to be different. No. Governments don't change declared policy very easily. In fact, they never admit that they were wrong. Show me an example. So they will go on saying the same thing, but what they do will change. And you can see that maybe happening around. But ultimately, you can't escape the balance of power. It has been skewed against it for a long time. So for me, what we've been doing for the last, in fact, from 1959 onwards, making sure that Tibetan culture, civilization, and identity is strong is essential. Because that's the only thing that will see us through. Tibetans could easily have been another lost people, like the Armenians, like, so many others. They're not. Part of it because of His Holiness, his personality and what he has done. But also because, I think, of what India provided. And that, I think, we shouldn't forget. That we should never give up on. And I don't think you can rely on great power rivalry to solve your problems here. Ultimately, I think what we're doing for the practice of Tibetan Buddhism, for Tibetan identity, for the culture, for the civilization of Tibet, I think that's very important that it keeps going.
There's an interesting premise in your book, and I want Ambassador Menon to actually react to it, because there's that argument that at the end of the day, Tibet never been colonized by Western power. If it was indeed colonized by the Russians or the Britishers, do you think Tibet's fate could have been different?
Yeah, that would be in a completely different history. But there are many what-ifs, I mean, Tibet, of the three, Tibet, China, India, two of us made the transition to a Australian state. Tibet, in some ways, chose not to, because they had a strong, distinct identity and personality of their own. I mean, the Kashag was divided through the 40s, especially, when it became clear where things were going. So, and I mean, that in retrospect, you can say, oh, maybe it was the right choice, wrong choice. But as the book shows, even if they had chosen to make that transition earlier, I'm not sure that the world was ready to do anything about it. And that's why I say this is a useful book. It's an honest book. Because it eliminates some of those what-ifs.
Professor Api, if I may ask you, some thoughts on how independent, how free was Tibet really before the invasion? And then I'll, steer back the conversation to the present and look at the future strategy.
That in 1911-12, the 13th Dalai Lama returned after 2 years exile in India, in Kalimpong, and he returned to Tibet and he declared independence. All the Chinese in Lhasa were asked to leave, and they had to leave not via the mainland, they had to come back via Yatong, the Chomil Valley, and Kalimpong. And similarly, they came back in 1940 for the intronization of the 14th Dalai Lama, and again in 49 they were asked to leave. So at that time, Tibet had its own currency, its own notes, and its own passport. Mr. Chakaba, who was the representative in Delhi, had a passport. He traveled to America with a passport. They had a flag, very important. And a small story about the flag. When His Holiness went to Beijing for a few months in 1955, and he was living in Zhongnanhai, and Mao Zedong used to come and visit him from time to time in the evening. And one time when he was leaving, he asked His Holiness, why are you not putting the Tibetan flag? So they were surprised, and Tibetan put the flag, but after that it triggered a tremendous debate within the party, within the Central Committee. can the minority have a flag or not? So it went on up to, I think, 82, this debate. So because Chairman Mao had said, you have your flag. So Tibet was independent. But I see something else also in the tragedy. It's a tragedy of the Tibetan people, of His Holiness, but it's a tragedy for the Indian border and all the population on the border. Because I think this Sardar Patel, who passed away 2 months after the Tibet was invaded, saw it and he wrote that very famous letter.
Records that I could go through, one thing becomes clear is that our policy immediately after independence was to speak up against European imperialism. And we wanted also to build up an Asian resurgence against this imperialism. And in this, we saw China, especially the People's Republic of China, as a country that also was speaking up against imperialism and saw an opportunity to partner with Communist China in both a nation resurgence and a movement against colonialism and imperialism. And I think funny evidence that I think our leaders felt that Tibet was an obscurantist theocracy. And the leftist movement in China was the new ideology, the new movement of freedom of the people. And here perhaps the sympathy was more for the people in China who were representing the modern world rather than the old world of religious beliefs. And both these factors put together shaped our policy.
I think we spend too much time still worrying about that and beating ourselves on the head for what we've done in the past. Look at the situation realistically. As I said, there are signs, and Claude was just saying, there are signs that the situation is changing, and certainly the world around us is changing. So let's see where we can take it. And be pragmatic about
if I
it.
could just also add, while you answer the question, that how are Tibetans, because you are constantly in touch with them, is this really about a territorial dispute, or is it really about the cultural, the identity, the Tibetan Buddhist followers? How do you really define this entire struggle as?
I think it's all everything together. But I just want to add one point that we don't mention very often, but long ago I've written a book called Karma of Tibet. I've never distributed, I've never sold to anybody. But Tibetan, they were too isolated. Ambassador Menon mentioned it, it was their choice. In 1947, when India became independent, government of India wrote to the government in Lhasa about ratifying the McMahon Line and the treaty that they had with India. And they refused for 11 months. And Mr. Richardson, who was representing the government of India at that time, really tried very, very hard. And only after 11 months, they say, okay, we agree. So this is part of the blunders or whatever it is, the karma. And also the system of governance was very weak because it gives, the reincarnation gives a gap of 20 years. And during these 20 years, there is no governance. And what do you have? You have regents. In the case between the 13th Dayama and 14th Dayama, the two regents start fighting, and there was nearly a civil war in 47 in Tibet. So it tremendously weakened the Tibetan state, who was not able to defend itself. So now I think hopefully it has changed, and that is very crucial. And of course, many people start talking about the succession of His Holiness. That is something of concern for India, and of course it's entirely his choice, whatever he wants to come back as an incarnation or emanation. But that gap has been historically creating too many problems. The Chinese had the trick. In the 19th century, there was 5 Dalai Lama. When they were reaching 18, 19, they just passed away or in the heavenly fields. So that created a terrible weakness. we don't realize, for example, that in September 1950, 136 cavalrymen of the People's Liberation Army invaded or took over the entire western Tibet, which is like 3/4 state is larger. I believe that the
From talking about culture, economy, 2002, to now actually talking about international territory, how significant a jump do you see in this act?
It depends how far the Americans want to push it.
How far do you
I
think?
don't know. I really don't know. I mean, there's a set of words in the act which everyone can read, but that doesn't indicate to me what they will actually do. I'd be very careful about saying, oh, the world has changed, they passed an act. Or I think you need to look at the basic relational forces and the balance of forces, the actual strength of people, and what the interests of the Wepas are, and how they see it at this time. Today, the Americans see it as in their interest to at least wave the flag of Tibet, but not necessarily. This doesn't extend to recognizing Tibet or to, I mean, there are clear limits to this level of commitment, and it's something that they're using in their rivalry with China. So it's driven not by concern for Tibet or Tibet. It's, you know, the primary driver here. There's genuine concern and so on, but the primary driver here is the rivalry with China. And so I'm very hesitant.
The Americans still remain unreliable, even from the
Everybody is
perspective.
unreliable. All powers are unreliable because they follow their own interests, and their idea of their interests changes over time. The situation will change. So nobody expects people to be reliable, and that's an unreasonable expectation if you're looking at the world as it is.
Professor Orpi, are you willing to crystal gaze? President
I
Trump,
think
if he
the-
high chances returns, what happens next?
the
with the
great
act?
game is going on, it's not finished. It's, and I think that the Resolve Act is part of the game also. And I was very disappointed because first day they said President Biden has signed, but there was a covering note. And in that covering note, he reiterated the One China policy for the Tibet Autonomous Region and for the Tibetan inhabited areas of Gansu, Qinghai, Sichuan, and Yunnan. So it dilutes completely. So it's part of the same game. But at the same time, it was interesting that to have the American passing a law saying that Tibet has been an independent nation. And I think we should just stick to that here. And because if Tibet had not been independent in 1914, there would be no McMahon and there's no border. Where would be the border if there's no? So India has to stick that Tibet has been independent in 1914 or 1947, 51, 52. Actually, Tibet lost its independence. I don't know if Ambassador Menon agrees with me, but the day when Mr. Shumul Sinha was head of the mission in Lhasa, that mission was downgraded into a consulate general in August 1952. Mr. Shumul Sinha, a colleague of Ambassador Menon's father, left. He was not happy at all because it meant that Tibet was no more independent. Because if you don't independent. So after that, it was ratified by the Panchil, so-called Panchil, the Tibet agreement in 1954, but in 52, the downgrading of the mission, I think it was the end. The first nail in the coffin was the last. Do you agree?
I agree. There was a two-line struggle in MEA on Tibet policy. There were those like Shumul Sinha, many people who actually thought that this was wrong, or that this wasn't the right approach. That we shouldn't allow larger considerations of fear of a world war, of anti-imperialism to determine Tibet policy. That should be determined on the basis of our interests on the border and so on. But fact is that, as I said, the past is the past now. Now let's move on and see what we can do today.
Just a final thought from you on this question, because you also end the book by writing that China is the current winner of the imperial game, and there is no end in sight to its occupation of Tibet, where you also mentioned that US and India will have very, very crucial roles to play. Does this act give a light at the end of the tunnel? What are your thoughts?
Well, it gives the current position. I don't think I can predict into the future as to what will happen. But certainly at the present moment, China is in full occupation of Tibet. And the great game goes on. America is playing that. We have our own considerations. We aren't an imperial power, but we have our own considerations in our global politics. And Tibet's weaknesses continue. The uncertainties of what will happen if there's a change there. You have the Central Tibetan Administration based in Dharamsala, which is the putative government in exile. But His Holiness is still the larger figure over the whole system. He's still the spiritual leader, although he has given up his political powers to the CTA. But the CTA will have to grow in stature to a point where it will be able to lead the people, especially the ones who are outside Tibet, when the transition takes place. And there I've mentioned the role of two countries will be extremely important. One is India, which will have to continue to support the movement, and of course the US also, because the US has been playing a very prominent role. We don't know to what extent, because the US has its other considerations in mind. So to what extent it will, how far it will go, we don't know. But we have to keep up the movement.
Let me now go over to the audience. If you could raise your hand, there's a mic in the room. Okay, we'll start with, can we have a mic here? The gentleman in the purple shirt. Please tell your name and the panelist to whom the question is directed to. If you could keep it short, we'll take more questions here. Can somebody else hold the mic for this row? It will be easier to move around the mics. Yeah, I'll come to him.
I'm Sudhanshu Ranjan, and my question is for, it is not for any other panelist. You said that the Indian government was more interested in speaking against the imperial powers of Europe, or in particular Britain. I don't think as a layman that appeals to me, because Nehru was very much enamored of the British and British culture. In 1961, when the Queen visited India, welcome that India gave, and it was succinctly and effectively put by Hindu Kavi Nagarjun, आओ रानी हम ढोएंगे पाल की यही हुई है राय जवाहरलाल, and the poem became very popular. So how far this statement is correct that India was speaking up against the imperial power of Europe? And the second part of the question is,
if you could keep it short, I'm sorry, but I'll have to be at the top.
I understand. How do you visualize the future of Tibet after His Holiness is alive? Thank you.
Can we take a question here?
Hello, my name is Tenzin Gambil, and I'm a proof of what Ambassador Menon just said. Like, I'm a Tibetan born and brought up in India, so yeah, we also have a representative here. My question to Ambassador Sinha, I have two questions, short ones. Firstly, what prompted you to write this book? And because I thought the moderator would ask it, but it was not asked, so let me ask.
Yeah, I'll let you ask this.
And my other question is, Ambassador yourself, you've been working at the United Nations. And I read portions of your book, and it mentions clearly that in the UN, we recently had the UPR, and there's a raising voice against China. Do you think Tibetans like us can rely strongly on the United Nations? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll just take that question there, and then I'll come for the second round. Yeah, pass on the mic there, please.
Good evening, panelists. My name is Mrityunjay Goswami, Research at the Center for Empowered Studies, New Delhi. My question directed to Ambassador Menon. Sir, until Galwan happened, we didn't know about the Special Frontier Force, FFS, largely contributed by the Tibetan people. So you have highlighted about past is past. Let's move ahead with a realistic tone. What would be the new calculation we can see in future? Maybe it's a hypothetical question I am asking the early stage, or maybe premature. Can we see more dynamism in terms of foreign policy and security matters of Indian government is concerned as far as question of Tibet on the pedestal? Thanks.
Can we just have the quick answers?
Well, the question on the India's policy against imperialism, that is, and colonialism, that is well documented. India, in fact, had moved a resolution in the General Assembly even before India became independent in December 1946 against apartheid. And then India led the movement against colonialism. So while India had excellent relations with Britain, India continued to be a member of the Commonwealth, India did not have a hostile relationship with Britain, but it was hostile to imperialism. And all the freedom movements that took place thereafter were supported by India, including right up to the 1980s when the apartheid movement was opposed by India. So that is quite well documented. On the UN's role, well, the Security Council itself, because one of the permanent members is involved and has a veto there, that possibility is very remote at the moment. The issue when it was taken up in the General Assembly in 1950-51, it was left hanging, it was left in abeyance. So it wasn't technically closed. The proposal was taken up and then it was kept in abeyance. That is the state as far as the General Assembly is concerned. But the UN is playing a role today. For example, when China's Universal Periodic Review came up in the Human Rights Council, then at least 24 countries mentioned Tibet and spoke up for human rights situation in Tibet. So at least on the human rights front, the UN continues to play a role. On the political side, it's a lot more difficult.
What prompted you to write the book?
Oh, the other one, okay. Now, I don't know, this subject always fascinated me, and I thought that there was a gap in the writing. We have many of my colleagues have written, many people know a lot more about Tibet, about China, and about British policies, etc. than I do. But I could not find a book which put all this together, which could be serve as a backgrounder to at least the younger generation to be able to understand what happened in Tibet. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that Tibet is our largest neighbor. Our longest border is with Tibet. And till 1950, we didn't even have a security guard posted there. And yet it was one of the most peaceful borders we have had in history. And suddenly that changed. It became a security nightmare for us and continues to be a security nightmare today. So this is a region, a country in which we have to take a lot of interest. We have to know about the place. We must know what happened in the past, because unless we know that, we cannot possibly prepare for the future.
Before I ask both of you to comment on the future after His Holiness, that question, what would you do if you were the NSA today, Ambassador Menon?
He asked, can we expect more dynamism from the government of India? I really don't know. I'm just a retired civil servant. I have no idea what the government plans. But I think there will be shifts because the situation is shifting, the balance of power is also shifting. And you can see already that, and not just on Tibet, but on Taiwan, on a whole series of issues, you can see much more, you can see subtle changes in the way the government of India expresses itself on the South China Sea, for instance. You can see it across the board. And that's a natural response to a changing situation around us. So yes, the situation is dynamic, so I would expect some level of dynamism in the response.
If both of you could also look at, of course, the reincarnation, unlikely going to be a smooth process. How do you see the future post His Holiness?
Just to continue on Ambassador Menon, I think I see the change when you go to the border areas. You see more dynamism, more. I mean, His Holiness has brought a new life. When he goes to Ladakh, the entire population of Leh is between the airport and his place of residence on 15 kilometers. You're just there's no leader in India today who would get that reception. So there's awareness, there's more communication, there's more awareness that the Tibet is the other side. Now, my wish was that we would speak only about Indo-Tibet border, not about. There's a dispute with China, but it's Indo-Tibet border. So I think it's good to remain. About the future, it's very difficult to say because it's first the choice of His Holiness. But as I said, there's a lot of concern among the Himalayan population, among the people in India. So I hope that some decision will be taken soon, and because His Holiness is not getting younger, nobody is getting younger, and that's the law of life. So it's very difficult to guess today in which direction But it's certain that if he goes for reincarnation, personally I've been advocating emanation, because emanation would be something like the Shankaracharya. You select a young person, a young boy, and you train him, you give him all the initiation, he's groomed for years. In the case of reincarnation, there's a gap. And the gap, the world today is not going the same speed that it was going 11th century when the first reincarnation of first Karmapa was found. And the world is going so fast, especially after COVID, after the confrontation in Ladakh. Everything has changed. So that's why I agree with Ambassador Menon that let's see what happens next. But it's changing very fast. And every day we see we saw what happened in America 2 days back. It's non-stop. Every day there's something like that. So it's maybe that Tibet will have a chance to something. And you have not to forget that China has never respected the agreement. Ambassador Menon spoke about the 17-point agreement in 51, but they have not respected also the 1954 Tibet agreement, so-called Panchil, and they have not respected the more recent one. I think Ambassador Shamsaran was part of it in 93, 96, 2005, and many of the things. So I think India slowly also is not following this, because if they don't follow, why should we follow this side? No? So, and if there was an agreement with Dalai Lama, I asked maybe 15, 20 years ago, I asked His Holiness, what will be the guarantee if you have an agreement with China on middle path? What is the guarantee? He said the world will put a lot of pressure on them. Today, they don't care a damn for any pressure you can put. They do what is in their interest, that's all. They don't, especially after 2012, after Xi Jinping came. So you have to keep this also into account. But India is slowly changing, but of course they won't do like Lal Bahadur Shastri did in 65, decide to recognize the government in exile as representative of the Tibetan people. But smaller change can take place, and hopefully.
Ambassador Menon, would you like to comment on this also? Because, of course, you have the Karmapa Lama, the Panchen Lama, the entire angles around there. But also from an Indian perspective, the number of Tibetans, of course, India opened up its doors and hearts to Tibetans after the invasion. But today, if you look at the younger generation, most of them have now gone westwards. Most of them are traveling out of India, of Tibetans. Is that something that should worry India, or that should lead to more engagement when it comes to our reaching out and connecting with the younger Tibetans?
Frankly, I think what the Tibetans have done to maintain their identity in a situation where they could so easily have been assimilated into the rest of India. I mean, India is a huge melting pot. If you look at what's happened to most people who came to India over the last 2 millennia. Apart from British, everybody else got absorbed. And it's really quite remarkable what they've done. And it doesn't matter where they choose to be, whether they choose to stay in India, go abroad, wherever it is. They've maintained that identity. But to go back to what Claude was saying, on reincarnation, this is ultimately, it's for the Tibetan community to decide. It's their religious issue, and the Dalai Lama himself will decide whether he wants to be reincarnated or not. If you convert it into an international political question, the Chinese will win. Because that's their preferred ground. They are the permanent members of the Security Council. If you convert it into a political issue, so for me, it's important that you at least maintain this as, this is Tibetan business, they have their own ways of dealing with it, let them deal with it. You recognize what they choose, but the choice has to be theirs, the Dalai Lama and his people. And it's for them to decide. And the Chinese will try and make it into an international political issue, and a question of do you say yes or no on this? I mean, just like they converted into a one China question. I mean, the same thing. And I think we need to be careful here in the way we handle the issue.
Can we move for the questions here? Okay, we'll just take please keep it short. Just a one-line question. Then I'll come to you next, and we'll go to the two questions there. Okay, while we change the mic, can we just take that question from you, the one in the green T-shirt there?
Mr. Menon, sir, recently US delegation was here in India, and do you think they have some political advantage to take by Biden forthcoming election? The second, Dalai Lama is more than happy to have a what's called like Hong Kong state of autonomy. But do you think India can declare as an independent state? What are its pros and cons?
Thank you.
Will it affect the election? I don't think Tibet is going to be the big issue in the US elections. I think they have other things to worry about right now. But about recognizing Tibet and so on, I'm not sure that either India or the world or even Tibet itself is ready for this right now. Dilip mentioned how things will need to develop considerably before we start looking at that as a serious possibility.
Okay, I will.
That India has always insisted that Tibet is an autonomous region. That we've always stressed.
With all the lexical fight between the suzerainty and the sovereignty, but yeah, your question?
I am Yogesh Gupta, from ex-ambassador from Ministry of External Affairs. I just want to congratulate you, Dilip, for writing a book on such a difficult subject. It's not easy for a non-China head to make this sort of attempt. So I think what you have done is going to certainly encourage others. I think India has played a great role in keeping the Tibetan identity alive and in allowing the Tibetans to sort of live in their own way, in different parts of India. I think that is something which has not been appreciated enough. Similarly, I don't think much interest has been taken by political analysts and writers in India to write on this subject. There have been a few books, but not the kind of importance that this subject deserves. I don't think we have taken enough interest. I am sure your book is going to encourage this. As Ambassador Menon and others have said, I think this stage is changing. The US-China rivalry is going to, it may lead to new possibilities. India's own relations with China, those are changing. That will lead to new possibilities. So I think this Tibetan question may acquire some interesting dimensions, and that is something for all those who are interested in this subject to continue to study. But thank you very much for making this effort, and I'm sure your book will be widely appreciated.
Thank you, sir. Hoping this discussion achieves this. Okay, we'll take three questions, one here, one in the green T-shirt, and one in the back row there.
Hello, Nihal Krishnan with The Hindu and the Council on Foreign Relations. Dilip, congratulations on the books. Thanks for putting together this. So my question is, what, particularly the youth of the world, the youth of India, what sort of productive mischief making can be done by the youth, by human rights organizations, by others, to highlight the cause of Tibet and push it forward? Tibetans, of course, on a somewhat regular basis, there's self-immolations, there's
extremely unfortunate.
Yeah, and so besides Tibetans putting their own bodies on the line, what in India can be done, maybe not from the government side, we already know what government's perspective is, but just as everyday people or those who are activists, those who are crusaders, what can be done in a productive, meaningful, but attention-seeking way?
Also, which doesn't put them into jail and take away their donations and refund money coming in.
Well, that I didn't say, but...
yeah.
Congratulations on the book, sir. So the current government insists that they have a more power politics view of the world, and they view a lot of issues through this prism, that they are more attuned to power politics, which India wasn't. Just by reading about events from past, it seems that India had a much more strategic and clear view in the 50s and 60s. And right now, with an insistence on power, there are cases where India might not display as much clarity. For example, there was a minority opinion that the delegation visit sidelined India in a way and tried to hijack policy. So what is your view in terms of India's approach under the current government to this issue, especially
Thank you. I'll take that last one here.
Good evening, sir. I'm Nachiket Jafri. I'm a student at Sciences Po Paris. So, seeing how most of the world today engages with Taiwan on an unofficial level in order to not provoke China, do we also foresee more unofficial engagement with the Tibetan government in exile by other nations, or would that be a political mistake and something that could provoke China in the longer run? Thank you.
Questions. Thank you so much. You want to start off by suggesting productive? No, we distribute it.
Yeah,
You'll not be saved from answering the questions.
So thanks. On the question of what can India do, well, India is already doing a lot in terms of allowing giving asylum to the huge number of Tibetan refugees, including the Dalai Lama himself. There is the organization, the Central Tibetan Association that is there in Dharamshala, which organizes the activities and handles the affairs of the Tibetans, not only in India but elsewhere in the world. So India continues to do this. Now, thereafter, do we move any further from this? That has to be seen depending on the geopolitical situation. As far as the world is concerned, many countries in the world are concerned and they have expressed their views on the human rights violations and the cultural destruction that has taken place in Tibet. India also in 1965 had referred to that in its statement in the General Assembly, but thereafter we've been a little more circumspect in that. As far as our politics is concerned, well, all big powers indulge in power politics. Certain other countries may accuse India of indulging in power politics. That's a way of how you perceive it. We think that our policy is based upon certain principles. And I think to a certain extent it is. We have our considerations and we want to promote our relations with China. At the same time, we have a policy that Tibet is an autonomous region of China and its autonomy should be respected, as also the cultural rights of the people of Tibet and the rights. Taiwan, I couldn't really get the question.
Do you think there's more clarity right now in the Indian government's policy?
Well, there is obviously a change taking place. There have been, but some may feel that the change is glacial, but there is certainly a degree of change that is taking place. The US delegation that went and called on the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala, certainly from the US point of view, from the point of view of the delegation members of the congressional delegation, was a message being sent. And the fact that they had chosen Dharamshala as the place meant that they wanted a message to go across of their support. And the fact that the delegation did call on the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister in India showed that India was not uncomfortable with an American delegation calling on the Dalai Lama on India's side.
But does that raise more worries, Ambassador Menon? I mean, India allowing these games to be played. Why pinch the dragon's tail in Dharamshala? His Holiness was set to travel to US for his surgery. Should India allow for these kind of, and somebody asked, will you see more governments engaging with the government in exile?
We're a free country, I think, aren't we? So why are we even talking of controlling this kind of thing? I mean, people are here as our guests, they are visitors, good luck to them, let them meet.
Most journalists don't get to travel to a lot of places too.
Yeah, well.
One issue we have not mentioned, which is I think very crucial for India, and that the Tibetans are leaving India. I don't know, I think there were maybe 1.2 lakhs of Tibetans, now there's 65,000. There's not the final survey, but that is a tragedy for India, and India can take steps to stop that exodus, this migration of Tibetans. I think it can make it easier for the visa, or give a sort of OCI, and it's up to India and Tibetan representative to discuss and to propose things, but I think it's not good for India that everyone leaves India, because they have been educated. Ambassador Menon said India has given everything in terms of keeping their culture, education, and now they are leaving for America. I don't know what is in America. I never go to America, but there must be something good. And since I don't know anything about diplomacy, and I never seen in my life so many excellencies and ambassadors, I want to suggest something. Maybe you'll say that I'm a fool. I should just keep quiet. But I think today we have Tibet is under EA division, East Asia division in the ministry. I think maybe it's time to split that division, to put a division for Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and Tibet, and not to keep Tibet under. So now I'm a fool of myself.
And I think it's time to wrap up, but any final comments from you, Ambassador Saran, Mr. Ravishankar Prasad? Or I do see one young boy, I'll take that as a last, sorry, that person there, yeah, sorry. One last question I'll take from him. Nothing? Yeah, okay, one comment from him and one last question from you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not young boy. I'm a Tibetan, born in Tibet, and then at the age of escaped to India for the education, for freedom. My question is, Ambassador Dilipji, you have seen all these imperial games, and then what's your advice to the? Thank you.
I think that's a very good question to end the session with. Ravishankarji, any final comments that you would like to make? Yeah, it's working.
I have to hit hard.
Speak loud enough.
No, it's not working. Can you give me that?
Dilip, you have done an excellent job. I have read the book. We were together in college. I know him for long. Keep on writing. That is the first friendly suggestion. Okay. This is a book extraordinary. There is only one comment I have to make, which you rarely mention.
Words or maybe advice for the citizens themselves? Young.
I wrote to Mr. Prasad, India, 4th century relation for Tibet. And Nalanda monastery was destroyed. All the many manuscripts were taken to Tibet, to Sera and other monasteries. And one of the greatest Pandits, Pandita Rahula Sankritayana, went to Tibet. Yes. He went 4 times, 34 and 38. And he was accompanied by Gedun Chokol, one of the greatest Tibetan scholars. They brought everything, I mean, many good manuscripts in Sanskrit on Palmist in your Patna Museum. So I think we should encourage people to study more and to see that deep relation, cultural relation and religious relation, and this should be more open because very few people know that all these manuscripts are in the Patna Museum. So, sir, please.
I will surely, I take it very seriously. I will. My word.
Your final comments on?
Well, to the Tibetan people here, the only word of advice that I can give, if any, is to preserve their culture, to keep alive the movement, just as the people who are living inside Tibet and facing all the repression that they have to. They are keeping alive their hopes in that country, and then we have to see how the geopolitical situation evolves and move on from there. But India has always been home to refugees from all over the world, and it is our pleasure and our honor to have His Holiness on our soil. The links that Tibet has with India are really ancient. The Tibetans themselves believe, and His Holiness himself has said that they are followers of Nalanda school, and that's the link. And Tibet has always looked upon India as its spiritual guru, as the land of the gods, and that is something that we should be proud of and keep alive in our relationship with Tibet. But before I wind up, I must acknowledge the help of several people in this book. I was remiss in not putting a chapter on acknowledgements in this book, but I'd like to thank Mr. Ashok Chadha. I don't think he's here, from our ministry, who did a lot of typing work for me of this book. The first person who went through the draft that I had prepared was my friend Sujit Sinha, who's a historian and strayed into the revenue service. He went through the book first and encouraged me. Then there were an American copy editor, Peter Leitzelter Smith, whom my son Abhinav had introduced me to, went through it. And of course, then there was Isha Banerjee of Pan Macmillan, who also went through to make the language a little lighter and a little more readable. I must thank Anjana Sengupta Raghavan of a suitable agency for finding a suitable publisher for me. I'm grateful to her for that. And of course, the whole team of Pan Macmillan, who have made this book possible, Saburi, Pooja, and a couple of ladies here, I don't know their names, sorry. Thanks to all of you for this. On the stage, Ambassador Menon and Professor RP, I cannot thank them enough for agreeing to come and be present here. Smita, for comparing this. She had done this for my first book also, so I was very keen that she should do this here. And of course, to all of you for turning up in such large numbers. I'm really grateful to everybody for coming here to encourage me, and also for the cause that for which I think I'd like to dedicate my book.
And actually, no one has left the room. So thank you so much, everyone, for being available.
And on that note, there are some copies still available outside, and Ambassador Sinha will be available in case you want to get them signed. Thank you so much.